And speaking of now, I've been talking about the book Primo Carnera and how the author Joe Page has kind of opened up some interesting points about Primo Carnera and the fact that he's kind of gotten a bad shake throughout the history of boxing, and even during his own time, about how good he really was. Well, joining us right now is the author, Joe Page. What's up, Joe?
Hey, Bill. How are you?
Not too bad, my man. Not too bad. Thanks for taking some time with us. And I have your book right here, and it was a great read. For me, it definitely opened up my eyes on some things. And I got a couple of questions for you. My first question is, what made you undertake this project? What made you decide to write a book about Primo?
Well, I had always since I was a little boy, had a fascination with Primo. I had grown up in New Jersey. My best friend's father, Len Lepore, had grown up across the street from the Laurel Gardens in Newark, and as a kid, he and his friends used to go and watch the fights, and would often carry in fighters' bags. A lot of times it was wrestlers, and by the time they met Primo, he was doing his wrestling. And carried his bags in. I got them in free, which, when you're a teenage boy, that's an important thing. And he met Primo a few times and was always talking about what a gentle giant he was, what an interesting man. And I guess from that point on, I became interested in him. And then being involved in boxing as well, off and on through my life, I also had an interest in the fight game. So between the two, I put them together and decided to put something together on Primo that I thought was a more even-handed treatment of Primo and his career than I think he normally has gotten from the average writer and commentator.
Yeah, well, he definitely, throughout the history, people are always talking about him as being a fraud, and most people, look at the Harder They Fall movie, which was,
right.
Based on him, and or at least loosely based, and everything points to it, and even how you point out in the book, even during his own era, he was getting slack. I mean, I was educated in the respect where I had no idea that the commissions had banned him, and they were really looking at his opponents under a magnifying glass. And, you point out that he actually could fight. I mean, he started out not being able to fight much, but he clearly got better and better.
Yeah, and he clearly did. So many folks say he couldn't fight, couldn't punch. There were so many people that, from the time, sports writers, though, who would make comments in the newspapers. Hype Igos one time said that he brings up his weight like an elevator in a new snappy office or tower building. James Dawson, the Times, New York Times, once said that his terrific right hand uppercut to the chin almost decapitated Sharkey and brought the title to Carnera. So, comments like that tell you, from the people that saw him actually at ringside, tell me that it's a different story. And true, Bert Sugar mentions that, and I don't have the quote in front of me, but I know he said that a lot of folks are still waiting for the punch he won the championship with over Sharkey to land. And, those comments that I read, and then actually just watching a video of the fight, which is available to anybody, I can see that punch land with a lot of force.
Well, that particular fight, and maybe you could explain to the viewers and listeners about it, but that fight, Jack Sharkey admitted, or at least claimed all the way to his deathbed, including his wife, that it was a legit fight, that he did not take a dive on that fight. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, he absolutely did. He said it at the time. He said it later. The scorecards had Sharkey ahead. Usually four of the 6 rounds. Sometimes the third can be scored a draw. But
Primo Carnera seems awfully similar to Vladimir Klitschko in the way he fought and everything. Is there any similarities between the two?
I think so. I think the Klitschko brothers have a great deal of similarity, and I think it's a European style of fighting. It's not your typical U.S. style of fighting, which it does vary a little bit. And I think that's a very apt comparison. It's funny. Vitali and Vladimir both get some people who say, "Oh, they're not very good champions." So It's a very, very apt comparison, I think, Bill.
Well, does he, in your opinion, the one thing I give like Vladimir Klitschko credit for is he's athletic to a degree. I mean, he's not, for his size, he's extremely athletic. Was Primo Carnera athletic? Was he a guy that could move? I know he was in good shape all the time. I know he was extremely strong, but was he athletic?
Big, strong guy, and again, a number of the sports writers at the time talked about how he did have good speed, good movement. I don't mean just speed in hands. He probably didn't have as much of that, but that he moved his feet fairly well. For a man at his size. Was he a terrific athlete? I can't say that he was, but I can say that he, as you point out, he was always in great shape. He took his training very seriously, and he was certainly strong as Knox. So I'd say he was a respectable athlete. Yeah, sure was.
And everybody knows that this was a guy that was taken advantage of by the people around him. And they really, as you put it in the book, they bled him dry. They really did. But what I found interesting is one of the guys that made the most money actually helped him towards the end. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
Yeah, he sure did. Luigi Sorsi was connected with the underworld folks that would like to hang around Primo, and they assigned him as Primo's financial advisor, I guess, for lack of a better term. And he was the one that kept a little bit of money in Primo's pocket, but mostly made sure the money went to his backers and whomever. Towards the end, after he had lost the championship, he actually made a decent comeback for a couple of years after he lost the championship, and had some good fights and some good wins. But then about 1936, just completely fell apart. Find out that he had a lot of internal damage. Ultimately, lost a kidney in 1938 after his final fight. Actually, was his final fight before he made a short comeback after the war. But when all that happened, he had a lot of medical costs and a lot of medical expense, and had to get back from his final fight. Actually, was in Budapest, and he had to get back to Italy from there after he recovered. And Sorsi actually did, he found a heart somewhere, and he paid for it, made sure he got back, and helped him prior to that actually build a home, a beautiful villa in his hometown in Italy, and a little town called Sequels, which is in the foothills of the Italian Alps just north of Venice, and it still stands today. In fact, it's his daughter, Jane Giovanni, has made it into a small museum, I guess, to her father and to boxing. So, in any case, that's Sorsi found a bit of a heart and helped Primo out a little bit and got him back home, and with a little bit of money in his pocket.
Yeah, I love the way you point out. We won't have to get into it. People have to buy the book to find out. But I love the way you point out how he actually, even when he had that good sign, he was still deducting money that he got. he still was paying himself for fees and stuff, which I thought was great. Another thing you touch in the book is about a lot of the allegations of his fights being fixed. And actually, one of the people in the chat room right now are asking me to ask you if Primo knew if the fights were fixed. But you pointed out some interesting stuff in the book, why it really doesn't make sense how a fight could be fixed, and why some of the fights that have gone down in history as being so-called fixed, where the probability of them being fixed was very slim to none. Can you get into a little of that?
Yeah, a lot of folks say, geez, they were all fixed. He barely fought a fight that was on the level, and it doesn't make a lot of sense for one thing. He certainly got to be a better fighter as time went on, and I don't think that they would have had to fix the fights later. Now you look at the earlier on fights, just the sheer logistics of doing it for a guy that they claim wasn't any good. I mean, so many people claim, there's a great paradox here. people say he was terrible. So, they needed to fix the fight so he could win. But then later on, he wins the championship, and they say, oh, that fight was fixed. There's only way he could win that thing again. Win the championship over Sharkey. And it just doesn't make sense to me, not to mention the logistics of trying to fix fights in Europe as well as then over here in the U.S. And when he was still fighting in Europe in the late 20s before he came to the U.S. in 1930, Leon C., his first manager, wrote a book that basically said, yeah, they were all fixed. And I guess I refer to a paradox. C talked about how great Primo was, and then suddenly when he got dumped by the underworld fellows that took over Primo's career when he came to the U.S., he suddenly turned on Primo and said, "Oh, he stinks. He's no good." But when he undertook his contract, he said, "This is I'm going to take him on because he's my dream of managing a heavyweight champion." So it doesn't wash. Why would you have to fix all these fights? Why would you put the money into all these fights? How would you keep it quiet if all these fights were fixed? And they don't have a lot of legitimacy. At least they're not coming up with a lot of witnesses saying, yeah, I took money, or yeah, this fight was fixed. It's just a lot of rumor and a lot of innuendo. And I just did not see a lot of evidence in my research, and I read as many newspapers and articles and such as I could from the time even. And there just wasn't any overwhelming support for it. So I guess that's where I come down on it. Could have happened. I suppose it could have. It just doesn't logistically pan out. It doesn't make a lot of sense. The overhead, the hoping nobody would spill beans over the fact that they were all being fixed. It just doesn't make sense to me.
You referred to him as a gentle giant earlier, and I can see that 100%. And he was also not the sharpest tool in the shed in terms of business sense and stuff like that. Obviously, the people that hooked their claws into him from an early point of his career saw all of that. And even in the ring, when he was fighting, he seemed not to have what we call today a killer instinct. Is that pretty true? I mean, I know he got mad a couple of times and ended up fighting a little differently than he normally would. But he's a guy that typically took a lot to piss him off, huh?
Yeah, it took a lot to piss him off. It sure did, Bill. You're right. He was by nature, I think, a gentle man. And you allude to, he occasionally would get ticked off in the ring. He got furious one time fighting young Stribling and lost the fight on disqualification for hitting him after the bell. I mean, he could lose his temper, I suppose, like any of us can. But typically, he didn't have the killer instinct that so many fighters, I think, great fighters, will have. He certainly suffered a great deal of emotional trauma after the Ernie Schaff fight. Ernie died just a couple of days after fighting Primo, and a lot of people say, "Oh, Max Baer killed him 8 months earlier in the ring," or something else. But clearly not the case. He died of because he shouldn't have been in the ring that night. He had influenza and he had swelling on the brain, and somebody's grandmother might have hit him just right that night and killed him too. So Primo, he had a soft spot, and he had a absolute sense of trauma over the things that can happen in a ring, and Ernie Schaff was an example of how that really almost drove him from the ring. He seriously considered just stepping away from it at that point.
Yeah,
right on the verge of winning the championship. His next fight was the second Sharkey fight where he won the championship.
I found it touching that until Schaff's own mom reached out to Primo Carnera and said, "Hey, it's okay." It seemed like he wasn't going to continue with his career, and that was something I never knew either until I read the book. And some of the things about Schaff and his death, I know you mentioned about the Braddock story and how they did that in the Cinderella Man and everything else. But what I appreciated was the influenza. Now, based on some of the things I read in your book and the way that they were describing this, could he have had the form of meningitis for this? Not the bacterial one, the viral that basically goes through your system and just weakens you, but that causes the swelling of the brain. Mm-hmm. And I saw in one of the reports when you had in your book from the doctor, they said that something about the meningenes fluid, which is related to meningitis. Is that what they thought he had when they did that autopsy?
They were pretty sure that's what he that probably killed him. I mean, just the fact that he got the swelling because he should not, from the hits, and he should just never been in a fight that night. He should never entered the ring. He'd had the flu, and then gone into meningitis, and then he'd had the swelling on the brain, and tragic results. Yeah. You're exactly right. And I wanted to go into that in detail because it's such a key component, I think, of Primo's career and his psyche, but also again, setting the record straight. I don't think Max Baer had anything to do with it, and Frankie Campbell, different issue, but Ernie Schaff, no. And again, in Cinderella Man, it was very disappointing to me that they made Max Baer to be such a total ass, and he was not. He suffered after the Frankie Campbell incident, as Primo did after the Ernie Schaff incident. So,
yeah, well, that's called Hollywood, and they need the hook. So.
Yeah, you're right.
Another interesting thing I never knew. I didn't realize that Ray Arcel worked with Primo Carnera. When did he start working with him?
Oh boy, you're asking me to dig here.
Well, he had to be
with Max Baer at one point. Let me pull up my notes here. I'm not looking. You may get me on this one. I have to get back to you on that.
But it was towards the end of his career, right? Because he was one of the guys that were, trying to work with him, and wasn't he one of the guys that were influential in saying that basically his career was over?
I am not recalling that, to be honest. I'm not recalling it.
Okay. No, I was making notes when I read your book, and I picked it up in there. That's because I had never heard that he was with Primo Carnera, and I was just curious to know, maybe it was related to the Max Baer fight. So maybe I'm totally off on that. They managed to pretty much swindle every penny from him. He did build, like you mentioned, his house and stuff in Italy. And he was able to, make some money later on. One thing I found fascinating is, even despite the kidney problem, and before they physically removed it, this guy was trying to make a comeback because he had nothing else to do, and he had people, going in the press saying that there was no problem, that he just needed some rest and stuff like that. I mean, they just continued to keep the claws into this guy.
Yeah, they absolutely did. There were folks who were anxious to just keep him fighting as long as they could until they literally bled him dry. Right up to his final fight of the first part of his career in 1937. There was there were folks just trying to keep him fighting. He fought Joseph Zupan in Budapest in 1937, and after that fight is when he won that fight. Of course, Zupan was first time a fighter; he was a wrestler really, but Primo defeated him, and then almost immediately went in the hospital, collapsed, went in the hospital, not in the ring, but within a day or two. And that's the time they took the kidney. So he figured he was totally done at that point. He did make a short comeback after the war, and the biggest reason he did it was, there was not a lot of money. He didn't have a ton of money after the war, as did a lot of people in Italy or in Europe at the time. So he fought about 5 more fights. He did it to get enough money to do 2 things: one, stabilize and pay off debts and things like that for his family, and not just his immediate family, his extended family there in Italy. He took a lot of them under his wing, which is, again, I think, a testament to his generosity. But he also had an offer to come to the U.S. and pursue a wrestling career. And so he wanted to get the seed money to go to the U.S. and do that. So leave money in the family's coffers and also come over here and launch what turned out to be a very lucrative and long-lasting wrestling career.
You know, one of my guys in the chat room just jogged. He mentioned something, and I just jogged my memory about what I read about Ray Arcel in your book. Ray Arcel, when Primo Carnera, remember when his leg went paralyzed in the fight?
Yeah.
And he was recovering in the hospital. Ray Arcel was working with him with his balance. Remember? That's what I read in your book. And one of the guys
I found the page here. It's 174.
That's funny.
But yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. That was after the Leroy Haynes second Leroy Haynes fight. He fought him in March and then again in April of 1936. And Arthur Donovan was a referee, and he of the fight was Nevitt's Field, the second fight in May of '36, and just sort of in the middle of the fight, Primo started, he could barely stand, and Donovan had done enough sheer mass and conditioning. I think he would stand a chance, just like the Klitschko's stand a chance today, and they've done very well with their chance. So as I say in the book, and I will argue this always, he wasn't a great champion, but he was a good champion, and he earned it. I think like anyone else earns it. But you've always got fighters who win a championship and people claim, it was a fluke. They had no. There's really no way that they should have won that. Buster Douglas or Leon Spinks or even Jimmy Braddock, people like that. They had one good fight in them or whatever, and you can argue that, but you can also say they won it on the level. They went out and they were the best fighter. If they beat the heavyweight champion that night, they were the best fighter in the world that night. And Primo clearly was, I think, during his second fight with Sharkey, and he defended the title twice over the course of a year. Or he's had it 3 times. He successfully defended it twice. And he didn't win fights over slouches. I mean, he fought Paulino Uskudin, who was maybe a little long in the tooth, but he was still a good fighter. Fought him back in Italy for his first title defense, and then Tommy Loughran in Miami a few months after that. And Loughran was a much smaller guy, no doubt, but he was no slouch. And I promise you, he didn't take money to lose the fight.
No.
So, and Primo just wore him out. So, though, a much better ring general and much better boxer, Loughran couldn't touch him. So, yeah, I think Primo, to answer your question, I think Primo was a good fighter who made the most of his opportunity. He clearly was the better fighter, at least for that one punch in the second Sharkey fight. And, George Foreman wasn't doing so great either. And when he won the championship back in, 94, but he landed one heck of a good punch. And that's all it takes.
That's always
the heavyweight division.
Exactly. You just took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly right.
One punch is what it can take sometimes.
What I really enjoy is reading what this guy used to eat, man. I mean, talk about an appetite, amazing. It's records. But in any event, listen, you guys got to get a copy of Primo Carnera. It's published by McFarlane, and I'm sure you can get it where all good books are sold. Joe Page did a great job with that. And Joe, I appreciate you coming on, and I would love to have you back in the near future, man.
Well, I'd love to come and discuss Primo or other books. That'd be great. Enjoy doing that thoroughly.
That sounds great. And just drop me an email, and we'd love to get you back on, all right?
All right, Bill. Thanks so much.
All right, Joe. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Joe Page, Primo Carnera. Get yourself a copy of this book. I enjoyed it. I'm telling you, I got the book. I got to be honest. Joe sent it to me a little, when it first came out, and I just didn't have a chance to read it right away. And then finally, I started reading it, and I was loving it all. Every page, he does a great job breaking it down and explaining exactly some of the questions you guys were asking me in the chat room in terms of the so-called fixes and stuff. And he does a good job at really making you like this guy. Like you get to know Primo Carnera in Joe's book, and I highly recommend it. Hey, listen, I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, I got some more news to talk about and other things, and we may even have time to open up the phone line, but we'll have to wait and see. I'll be back in 2.